only kind of, hopefully we're getting video from the desk over there as well. So. Right, let's keep going. Sorry, it's all, we're piling our way through. See how far we get. So we're going to look at the intertestamental period and see how God prepares people for Jesus. So we're going to look at Alexander, and in particular his establishing of the idea of a divine king over the world. We're going to look at the 4 kingdoms that Daniel prophesied. We're going to see how Judea suddenly rises in significance in the flow of all of these empires kind of arising around it. There's a little moment where they start to grow with independence. And interestingly, it coincides with one of the particular dates that you could, if you wanted to, predict the Messiah coming. If you took Cyrus's decree for the return to Jerusalem and the returning of worship, but his clearly was just about worship, not about rebuilding. But if you did take Cyrus, then you get to the end of 490 years, but it's not that the Messiah has come, it's an absolute disaster for them. So it's almost the anti-Messiah. But we'll see all of that coming about. And then we see Rome rising, coming down to Augustus, Herod, and Hope, and people's expectations. So now we're getting into areas that aren't so well known by folks. But again, the idea of that slide is it gives you a little bit of a framework as we kind of talk through. We've got, we're starting here. The Jews are spread around because they've been taken into exile. Jerusalem is there, but it's fallen and been destroyed. We're going to come through Daniel's prophecies. They're going to come back from exile. We're going to go through the arrival of Alexander's empire. We're going to see the dispersed Jews starting to Hellenize, becoming more Greek in their way of thinking, and then the emergence of Rome, and right way down to the arrival of Jesus. So, Alexander has a key role. So at the end of the Old Testament, 2 of Daniel's empires have emerged. Alexander is now turns up, so I'm just going to run through some kind of key dates. So 400 BC, the leopard with wings starts to kind of emerge as a power. Socrates, famously Greek, of course, is condemned to death. He makes this kind of ironic statement: if a perfect man ever came, the world would probably kill him. He is actually talking about himself because they were about to execute him. So, I just thought it was an interesting one. Artaxerxes becomes ruler of Persia. Philip is king of Macedonia. But actually in 338, Philip conquers and unites Greece. So Greece is suddenly signed with Persia. Artaxerxes is assassinated. And in Rome, we've seen the beginning of the city of Rome starts to consolidate several territories, but it's sort of outside of where people think the big empires should be. Most of the big empires up to this point have been emerging within the fertile present. And so Rome is on the territory on the edge there in the 4th century. So Philip gets assassinated at his daughter's wedding. I think there's probably a family feud. Those things still happen. So Alexander becomes king of Greece. And so he spends the next years putting down rebellions, consolidating power. Then he goes on a big kind of collection campaign. So he attacks and eventually conquers Persia and Syria. He conquers Phoenicia on his way to Egypt, and this is significant because it starts to hit biblical prophecy. As predicted by Zechariah, Yahweh's word is against Damascus, Hamath, and Tyre. Tyre built herself a stronghold, heaped silver like dust like fine gold. Behold, Yahweh will dispossess her and cast her wealth into the sea, which is exactly what Alexander does. He comes down, and Tyre has always withstood sieges, but he takes over the part that's on the mainland, and actually, literally, shoves it all into the sea to build a causeway for his soldiers to march out to the main city. And when they destroy it, they throw it into the water. So, he then, after 7 months' siege, destroys the mainland, uses the rubble to build a causeway to the island citadel. Okay. It goes on after that. Ashkelon will see it, and Gaza also. and will ride in agony as will Ekron, and the king will perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon will be inhabited, mixed race will dwell in Ashdod, and there will also be a remnant of our God, and they'll be like a friend in Judah, and Ekron like a Jebusite. So this actually now happens because he goes on. So Ashdod and Ekron, eventually, they get conquered, but they surrender quickly. So he leaves them, basically. And over time, as Jerusalem starts to emerge and Judea starts to emerge, they get absorbed as a mixed people who are those friends that it talks about in the prophecy of Judea. So they are half and half. Whereas Gaza and Ashkelon actually resist, and so their king does get executed, along with all the women and children getting sold as slaves. So they get destroyed. At which point, on there. Why is it clicking around twice? Okay. At which point, Josephus tells us Alexander started heading into Jerusalem. Thought, right, we'll conquer that one down here, you see. So the people panic. So when he'd taken Gaza, he made haste to go to Jerusalem, and the high priest ordained that the people should make supplications and join together. He's riding in on a war horse statue. So this king is coming, not riding humble on a donkey, but on a war horse towards him. This is, remember, it's all there in the prophecy. Behold your king. Who's the your king? Not an external king, your king. When he comes, he's humble, riding on a donkey. Here is Alexander coming, and he is riding on a war horse. And JaliH has a kind of word from the Lord. He also makes reference to Daniel, which really annoys lots of modern scholars because they don't believe Daniel was written at this point, and so they think that Josephus is wrong. But it kind of, again, just remember that every time someone tells you that there's no, what they mean is they cut the evidence out and don't believe it. You think it must be a later edition. Zechariah talks about, I'll come around my house against an army, no one passes through or return, no oppressor will pass them again. I've seen it with my own eyes. And so actually what happens is the army will get there, but actually what happens is JaliH comes out and he shows him the books of Daniel and the empires that are predicted, and he identifies Alexander and says, yeah, we knew you were going to arise. And so Alexander then is persuaded to come into the temple and offer sacrifice and leave. And it's in that context then that Zechariah now turns it around and says, rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. It's 22 words long, there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and Jesus is hidden every 22nd letter. It's in your notes, I think you can actually follow it. It's actually, I haven't put it in there. In that very verse. So when you ask the question, sorry, let's go back. Is it in the notes that way? Hang on, I just think, I hope I put it in the notes. Pardon? The intertestamental period we're in.
Page 21.
Page 21.
But it's not, we don't have the actual
I've not actually put the Hebrew in so you can see the name of
You can
Jesus.
send it out on an email.
Yeah. If you watch the videos that link to this, you'll find them in there. So you actually find Jesus' name in that verse. So anyway, he goes on into Egypt. He's now received as king, and he's seen as an incarnation of Osiris. So he makes plans for a new city, Alexandria, which again is important because Alexandria becomes the place that produces the New Testament, the Greek version of the Old Testament, the Septuagint. The Septuagint is really fundamental because as we found older and older texts, we found that the original Hebrew in the Masoretic text is not so original, it's been modified. But actually, we always know that there were some differences because of the Septuagint. And it turns out the Septuagint seems to be a better translation than if you do a modern English translation from the Masoretic text. And guess what bits are suddenly missing? It's the most messianic bits. The way that someone put it as a scholar is, it's like the rabbis added a gloss that kind of hides Jesus in some of those things. So you often find, so to give you an example, Psalm talks about pierce my hands and my feet. The Hebrew in the Masoretic text doesn't make grammatical sense. It says, my hands, my feet, lion, just like that. And we normally translate it as, you see, some translations put my hands and feet are like a lion. It doesn't say that, it says my hands, feet, lion. just those words are being kind of created out by changing a couple of the vowel markers, if that makes sense. So the Masoretic is strangely has been held account by the scholars of Alexandria. So he extends his empire, now being seen as divine. He actually dies in Nebuchadnezzar's palace on the 11th of June, caused by an illness, not totally sure how, but it seems to be over drinking. So celebrating too hard. And he dies at the age of 33, which is not the age that Jesus died at, but it's amazing how much it's imprinted itself on the ancient world. It's probably why lots of people feel very upset that even though the gospel accounts give a longer account of Jesus' life, he is well past 33 when he's crucified. A lot of people think that when Luke says he was about 30, that's the beginning of his ministry, and he means just a few days after he was 30, and that he died 3 years later at 33. They do so because of the emotional desire for Jesus to die at 33. There's so many ways it doesn't work. One, Luke actually says it at Jesus' baptism, which is at least 9 months before Jesus actually starts his ministry. And after he starts his ministry, there are over 3 Passovers. So 3 Passovers gives us over more like 3.5 years of Jesus' public ministry. Add another half, maybe even more, before at the point when that comment is made, you have at least 4 years. Plus, about 33, if Luke says about, he means about, because he's very precise when he can be precise. That makes sense. So I'm just saying, don't want to upset anyone, but it goes right the way back to that ancient thing of Alexander is 33. So by 300 BC, after he dies, you see what's actually happened is his empire splits into 4. And when Daniel's seen the empire that was coming, he has 4 heads. It's a leopard with 4 heads. And you see the 4 heads emerging. So we get the Ptolemaic Empire, the kind of the Seleucid, or predominantly the Greek, Lysimachus and Cassandra Empire. Those disappear after a while, but there are 4. And they all start kind of fighting each other. And in that process, there's a little bit of peace for those who are kind of cities like Jerusalem. Aramaic is now taking over from classical Hebrew among the Jewish communities in Old Babylon and the Persian era, and the Talmuds are emerging. It's very useful because they are now having to create a commentary, because even the language of Hebrew is being lost by the Jews. So they produce a commentary on what the things mean, which is where ideas like the fact that the voice of God or the word of God is seen as an individual character come from those writings. Greek language and culture are starting to Hellenize Jews in other regions, particularly in the port towns like Alexandria. So now there's a huge amount of Greek. We're probably not getting onto it. Jesus certainly spoke Greek to a good standard. The debate really in modern scholarship is how well he spoke it, not did he. Does that make sense? They now recognise, it didn't used to be this way, so I'm commenting on it, that certainly in Galilee, and it should be obvious, certainly in Galilee, the main language is Greek. But amongst the Hebrews, the question is which one do they speak? But the point is, because there are more people in Galilee speaking Greek, Galilee is Gentiles after all, everyone living in Galilee speaks Greek. Just how much? And Jesus regularly talks to people who wouldn't be Hebrew speakers. So what does he speak to them in? He talks to a Roman centurion. He talks to Pilate. So Jesus definitely spoke Greek. That's another story. Sorry, let's stay on track. So Rome is now growing in Europe. It's pushing into North Africa. Get the war with Hannibal, of course. The Seleucid Empire is growing. And you notice that Jerusalem sits on the border between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic, if you've got the little map in front of you that we've put up. And so as one is rising and the other, it keeps changing hands. Who's in control? It keeps flip-flopping between these 2 empires. As the Seleucid Empire now starts growing, and Antiochus IV becomes king of Syria, which is the head of the Seleucid Empire, and he now pushes down towards Egypt. He fails to really make progress into the Ptolemaic, and in kind of vengeance, he smashes Jerusalem up and desecrates the temple. And he doesn't get into Egypt, but he does capture Jerusalem and the temple. And he dedicates the temple to Zeus, which was seen as a fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy about the abomination that makes desolate, as he sets up the image of Zeus in the temple. So then now there's a lot of messianic hope knocking around as we kind of push on, because things are going so badly, and the Maccabeans the Maccabeus family start to kind of emerge, and they start to fight back. We all know about the celebration of Hanukkah, which dates back to the retaking of the temple and restoring it under the Maccabean rebellion. But in 64, Antiochus dies. He's kind of an archetype of the Antichrist, or he's the great desecrating kind of leader. And Judas Maccabeus is killed, but the rebellion continues under his brother. Judas then, in his death, becomes in their minds a model for the Messiah. So when we meet the characters called Judas in the New Testament, including Judas who betrays Jesus, but there's also Judas the Obscure, or Jude the Obscure, it's because the name becomes very popular because he is seen in the Messianic light. That makes sense? So, obviously, the whole city, the whole area is called after Judah, but actually part of the popularity of the name is because of Judas Maccabeus. But in this kind of period of kind of struggle between the two that it's in between, they become semi-independent, Judea does. And the Maccabeans start to kind of reign. Jerusalem's fully liberated, becomes a semi-independent kingdom. So next kind of in the dynasty, John Hyrcanus becomes high priest. So now you have the civil leaders and the religious leaders are now the same people. And this is seen as a celebration of something prophesied in Ezekiel, which is the coming together of the crown and the turban. See, the turban, which is the priest's hat, and the crown is the royal hat. And so they are presenting themselves, you see, as the messianic family. That makes sense? So the Maccabeans are becoming that in the popular way of thinking. Around 130, the Pharisees start to emerge. Oh, did I go back? There's more on the emergence of the different sects, but this is now happening in the 2nd century. But the Pharisees start to emerge. They're all around because the temple is now under their control. Things are being reinstigated. The Pharisees become very zealous about the temple and keeping the law. But at one point, one of the key Pharisees insults John Hyrcanus' mother and her impropriety, because she was, in his kind of way of saying it, is a bit of a sleep around, wasn't she? And raises kind of questions about John Hyrcanus' lineage. So in revenge, he sets up a new sect called the Sadducees, after the idea of Zadok, the priest. So, remember it? I won't sing it. So the Sadducees come out of the name from Zadok, but quite literally to kind of be focused on the temple, but not the Pharisees. So both of them are putting the temple at the heart of their religious faith and worship. However, at the same time, people don't like the politics, and so you start to see the beginnings probably of, and we don't know the exact date, but the emergence of the group we now know as the Essenes, although they're probably less unified than we might having a single name for them represents. Does that make sense? So the Essenes are kind of more like normal folks they're so political, not dissimilar in the church in the UK. You know, Catholics and Anglicans always fighting, we're just going to go do our chapel thing over here. You know, see the same emotions going on. So they start to emerge. And out in the wider empire, the Jews are having to deal with very different issues, and so we get Hellenization happening, and the Hellenist synagogues start to emerge. So it's all going on.
You see at the bottom of your slide, previous slide, the Jews captured. Where was that? It was under your name.
Under my name. So the Jews extend their territory, capturing Edom. Capturing Edom, which is significant because they capture Edom, and so Herod's family at this point, Herod's not been born yet, Herod's family convert to Judaism. So by taking the territory of Edom, Herod's family become Jewish. And Jews are very clear that Judaism is not a genetic thing, it's about adoption into the family. But believe me, when Herod comes along, they didn't think like that. He's an outsider, he's a foreigner. But so Judea now, as it's being successful, it's got its own temple, it's got sects, they've got the luxury of having arguments amongst themselves. They start to expand into Perea, Samaria, Idumea, Galilee, and Iturea. So Galilee is now taken under the control of Jerusalem, first time for a long time. The Edomites become proselyte Jews, and Herod gets born 74, 73. So ethnically he's an Edomite, but religiously he is fully Jewish. He's born into a Jewish family. There's internecine fighting kind of breaks out. Pompey captures Jerusalem on behalf of Rome. And there's an emergence of messianic kind of cults. And you kind of see this reflected, and if we get onto it now, we'll see there is actually, and you've got the notes, you can see some of the literature that starts to emerge. So we can start to see how people are thinking and waiting for a Messiah. So this little document here makes reference, it's actually found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, makes reference to 4 messianic figures. There's a prophet like Moses. Remember, Moses prophesies, there's a prophet who will come out like me, just referred to as the prophet. Well, he makes an appearance in the Gospels because they come and ask John, are you the prophet? And when they say that, they're reflecting part of the speculation. People are looking for these anointed characters that they find in the Old Testament that God promised, one of which is the prophet who's like Moses. Now, we know that Jesus is that prophet, and it's explicit because when Moses says that you'll raise up from among your brethren a prophet like me, and then he says, and listen to him. And when Jesus is being transfigured, and Peter is talking, the voice comes out of heaven and says, this is my son, listen to him. Same phrase. That kind of saying, this is the one you're supposed to listen to. It also refers to a priest-like Messiah, or it's sometimes referred to the Messiah ben Levi, Messiah ben Aaron, and strangely, even sometimes the Messiah ben Ephraim. Oh no, that's the next one, sorry, Joseph. There's also a Messiah, so there's a priest-like Messiah that they find in the Old Testament. And they also find a suffering Messiah, which lots of modern Jews aren't aware of those prophecies because they've not been highly taught in synagogues. But they're clearly there, we know that in the Old Testament. And they refer to him as the Messiah, son of Joseph, ironic, or the Messiah, son of Aaron, because they're seen as being from the north, and Joseph is in the north, Ephraim is part of Israel. Does that make sense? So that's why the title is there. So they have all of these different, they're all referred to in this one document, but there's more about them elsewhere. What is that? Okay. Oops. So the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, parts of it were actually found again in the Qumran scrolls because often it's seen in Judaism as being a later forgery by Christians. But it's not the kind of thing that you'd really write if you're a Christian, because yes, there is some stuff that really points at Jesus, but there's a whole load of other stuff as well. And so it's normally recognised as being, it fits into first century. In other words, it's just before Jesus is born. And so you've got the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, so kind of explorations of the messianic ideas in the different houses of Israel. So I've got a few quotes from here, but these are just a few from quite a lot, so that's what I'm saying, there's a lot of stuff in there. His star will rise like heaven, like a king, kindling the light of knowledge in the day illuminated by the sun. And in his priesthood, so the king and the priest, you see, they're coming together. This is the testimony of Levi, supposedly, this is what Levi's talking about. So he's a king and a priest in Levi. There'll be a star, a son of righteousness, taking the phrase from Malachi. Again, this is now the testimony of Judah. In him is found no sin. See? Now, you can say, well, this isn't the Bible. No, but this is reflection on Scripture, trying to identify what are the characteristics of the Messiah. Does that make sense? So you can see them here in the... oh yeah, I've only put a couple in there. There are more in there, and this is where we're supposed to have the coffee break. Are we going to do that, or should we just kind of push on through and do... Yeah, let's push on through.
Can I just make a point? Sorry, in the notes, that the fragment that Kristen was referring to is because it was written in the Old Testament. It appears in the Old Testament bit of the notes, which is on page 7. Yeah. So it didn't appear under the intertestamental period. So